Okay, so we can get started now. First off, welcome everyone to Tech Girl United's first data science program. We're all really excited to have all of you here today. And as all of you know, this is our first day of the program. I just want to give you guys a quick little background on our organization before we get started with the lesson. So, Tech Girls United is an organization that seeks to empower girls in technology, providing resources and opportunities for them along with a community of other girls to learn with. This is our first data science program, and we are really excited to have you all here. We have a lot of exciting stuff in store for all of you. But before we get started, I also want to give our organizers a chance to introduce themselves. So, I'm one of the organizers. I'm the lead organizer for this event. And my name is Megan Jacob. I am really interested in artificial intelligence and machine learning, and that's really my passion in technology. I'm also a strong advocate for women in STEM, and this organization was just my idea to combine my passions to create an impact on the community. So if any of our other organizers want to go ahead and introduce themselves, that would be perfect.
I can go ahead next. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, cool. Hi everyone, my name is Shalini. I am on the curriculum development team and I'm teaching you all today and later on this week. A little bit about me. I just graduated from UC Berkeley, college grad, which is really weird to think. I graduated I studied stats, statistics, computer science, and data science. I recently learned about data science a few years ago through different organizations, and I decided to take classes in school, and it's honestly so amazing. So that's why I was really interested in teaching and creating curriculum for this program, Tech Girls United, and I'm really excited to share some data science with you.
I guess I'll go next. So, hi everyone. I'm Trisha. So, I'll be basically answering anyone's questions in the comments for today. And a little bit about me. I'm currently a rising junior in high school, and I'm also really interested in learning about computer science and data science. So that's why I am a part of the curriculum development team for Girls in Tech.
Yeah, and we have two other people on our team, Panita and Akshita. They're both not on this call right now, but they have also helped us out with marketing and logistics for the event. And also, just to let you guys know, we are recording right now, so if you aren't comfortable with being recorded, you can turn off your camera. That's totally fine. And that's all I have, so I'm going to pass it over to Shalini, who's going to be screen sharing and showing you guys our curriculum for today.
Cool, let me just share my screen. Megan, could you allow screen sharing?
Okay, Do you know where the setting is? Oh wait, okay, wait. Oh wait, wrong setting. Okay, I just see okay, I can make you host.
Yeah, that should work. Yeah.
Okay.
Just Zoom things. Okay, cool. Okay, can people see my screen?
Yep, we can see you.
Cool. Let's get started. Okay, so today we are going to be learning some Python basics, and then we'll be going over some code, and just in general, feel free to ask any questions in the chat. I'll try and look at the chat once in a while, or Megan and Trisha are also on the call. They can answer your questions in the chat there as well. But a little bit about Python. So Python is a programming language. It's fairly easy to use because it's very similar to English, so it makes it very intuitive for users, and it's a very nice beginner coding language to use. It's also used a lot in data science. The main data science languages are Python, R, and SQL. So this is definitely one of the top three. And it's used in a variety of applications. There's a lot that you can do with Python, and we'll be learning more about all the different applications throughout the week. So to start off with Python, there are a few basic commands which we'll be going over. So one of the first things that you do when you learn a programming language is kind of just, there's like history background to it, is hello world, and that kind of shows you that you can use the language, make sure it's working and everything. So to do this in Python, we do print hello world, and let me actually go to our REPL. So this screen, or actually, can everyone see this screen, the REPL?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, perfect. Just want to check because I'll be going from the slides to this. Okay, so this screen over here, this is REPL.it. So this is a way that we can use Python in our website in whatever browser that you're working in. So on the left side here, we have our Python script, so we can have a bunch of lines of code like I do over here. And if we press this run button, it'll be able to run all of the code. And then on the right over here, we have the console. So this is where we can write like one line, and then it will output something for us. So I think all of this makes a little more sense when I actually do something. So let's try doing hello world, since that's our first thing for today. So to do hello world, we can do print hello world, and then we see that we get an output of hello world. So that's kind of how the console works. So we can write lines of code over here and then press enter, and then we get the output. So that's kind of the first thing we do in any programming language. So going back to the slides, some other basic commands, just kind of things you want to know about Python. So indentation is super important. So you might write lines of code, but you need to make sure to remember the different syntax. So there are different keywords in Python. There's different syntax, spaces, indentation, and it's very important that you put the proper amount of everything. So indentation in Python is 4 spaces, otherwise you might get an error. So for example, if we wanted to use this print thing again, and we type in 1, it outputs 1. But let's say we indent it. Then we see we get an error. So Python doesn't like you indenting when you aren't supposed to. So instead, we would do that, and we get rid of the error that way. So some other basic things in Python. So we have variables, strings, and comments. So variables are a way you can store a value in, so you can store a value in a variable, and it's very handy when you have tons of lines of code. When you don't want to keep repeating something over and over, you can just store it in a variable and then keep using that. And it makes your code a lot more readable, easy to use, and other people can also use it as well. So how you would set a variable, you have the name of your variable. So if we go over here to this highlighted portion, we can see some example variables. So over here, we have the name of our variable, then an equal sign here, and then whatever value that we want to set our variable to. And it's very important to have it in this exact order. So the name that you want your variable to be called, the equal sign, and then whatever value. So this is a very common thing to use in Python. Variables will come up a lot, and it's nice because, for example, we'll do this exercise in a little bit, but you can really just like generalize your code in this way. We also have strings in Python. So strings it's a way that you can use words in Python. So let's say you want to write down something, you want to output a certain message, you would want to create a string and put quotes, and then your message would go here. So that's how you create a string. You can put double quotes or single quotes. And that's kind of just a data type that's used in Python itself. Strings, you just put double quotes or single quotes around it, and then Python kind of just looks at that thing as a whole chunk. So it doesn't look inside of it, it's just kind of like a string. And then the last thing we have for this specific slide are comments. So you might have seen this on this slide. So anything, all of these kind of grayed out portions of the code are comments. So Python doesn't look at this. Comments start with a hashtag. So it's really an opportunity for you to like write whatever you want. You can label your code, kind of like what I've done here. So all of these are comments. Python isn't looking at it. It's not going to be run. It's kind of just for you to make your code more readable. Okay, so let's quickly do this exercise. So this is related to variables. So let's say we have days in the leap year variable, and the value for that is 366. And then we have days in a normal year, and we want to set this to a specific value. So here, number of days in a normal year, that would be 365. So let's try and find the total number of seconds in a decade using variables. So to do this, we can easily use variables. So all these ... dots, we're going to want to fill those in. So the number of seconds in a day, number of hours in a day, minutes in a day, years in a decade, and seconds in a decade. So in order to do this, let's start off by filling in seconds in a day. So in order to do that, okay, sorry, let me switch these around real quick. Okay, so hours in a day. So hours in a day, we know that there are 24 hours in a day. So we can fill that in. And to find the seconds in a day, so we can use the variable that we just made, hours in a day. Oh, sorry, these got out of order a little bit. So minutes, okay, minutes in a day rather. Okay, so we have hours in a day, and then we have hours. We know that there are 60 minutes in an hour, so we can multiply this by 60 to get the number of minutes in a day. Then in order to get the number of seconds, we can use this variable, the minutes, and also multiply by 60, since there are 60 seconds in a minute. And then we know that there are 10 years in a decade. And then in order to find the seconds to years comparison, seconds in a decade, we can use this variable and this variable. So seconds in a day and years in a decade. And we can print this out. And we get the number of seconds. So that's kind of a way you can use variables. This is if you have like a lot of different numbers you're using, instead of like just writing down the numbers kind of by hand, you can use these in order to gain kind of more understanding of what your code is doing. Yeah, so let me move on. So Python data types. So there are a lot of different data types in Python, and based on what data type something is, you can do different things with it. So we kind of explored data types. So for example, we have string, which we just were working with. That's a type of data type, and that's a text data type. And once again, to create a string, you would put double quotes and single quotes around it, double or single quotes around it. We also have integers. So if you have something like this, x equals 5, that 5 is an integer. So this x variable would have a type of int or integer. So we have a bunch of numeric types. So there's an integer, there's a float, which is essentially like the decimal form. So like 2.9 would be a float, minus like 3.6 would be a float. And then we have complex numbers, and there's a whole bunch of different types, data types in Python. Another popular data type is a Boolean. So a Boolean represents true or false. So those are the outputs of a Boolean. It has the values of true or false, so it's very useful for we'll get more into this in a little bit, but seeing if a condition is true or false, that would be a Boolean type, and seeing if you want to do something or not. So yeah, here are a few examples. So the hello world that we did before, that is a type of string, and you can see that by the double quotes around it. We have our integers, our floats, or decimals if you want to call them that. It's called a float in Python. Complex numbers, you might have seen this in math class with real and complex numbers, but there's a data type for that in Python. There's also lists in Python. We'll be learning more about lists in a little bit, as well as tuples. And yeah, there's a bunch of data types, and each of these different things you can do. There's a lot of different functionalities that work with all of these different data types. So it's very useful to know what variable you have and what data type it is. That way you know what you can do with it. Okay, yeah, so we talked a little bit about strings. So strings are a type of data type, hello world, single or double quotes. Let's see, we talked about all of this. Yeah, so string is a type of data type. And like I said, there's different things that you can do with each of these data types. So for example, one of the things you can do is connecting two strings together. So if you wanted to kind of combine two words together, you can use this plus sign. So let's try this out. Oops. So for example, if we wanted to, let me clear this. If we wanted to print hello, so here we're concatenating or adding two strings together. Sorry, let me refresh.
Oh wait, Shalini, can you take a look at the participants list really quick? I think that you might have access to let people in. Because I'm not seeing that anymore, and I know someone's waiting in the waiting room.
Uh-oh, okay, yeah, 1 sec. Okay. I think everyone's been let in. Okay, cool. So adding strings. So we put our quote around hello and plus, and then we have world. So the result of this is going to be the combination of both hello, world. And because I didn't put any spaces within the string, there aren't any spaces in the result. So they literally just get like smashed, combined together. So that's one thing you can do with strings. You can add them together and kind of just combine them. And then another kind of cool thing you can do is it's this this function method here. So this is lower. So how you would use it is you have your string here, and then dot lower, and then the parentheses, the open and close parentheses. So if you put it into that format, it converts the whole string into lowercase. So as we can see here, we have print hello world, and we have the H and the W capitalized. But the result of this, the hello world is completely lowercase. And there's a bunch of other string methods. These are only 2 of the string methods, but there are tons of them. So I definitely recommend, we'll send these slides out, but I definitely recommend like checking out the other string methods and kind of just playing around with them. There's a lot of cool things you can do with strings. Any questions so far? I haven't been looking at the chat. Okay, I'll just move on. Okay, so another data type that I mentioned earlier were lists. So lists, you can kind of, so I like to think of a shopping list kind of in Python. So you can basically put different items into your list, take it out, and you can do a bunch of different things with lists. It's how you define a list in Python. So we have our variable list name here. So this is our variable, then equals, and then this part on the right where it says list item 1, list item 2, list item 3, that's our actual list. So each of the items, so we have 3 different items in here, and they are all enclosed in brackets. So that's how you define a list. You use the bracket symbol, and then you separate each of the items by commas. And you can put different items within the list. You can put like strings in the list, integers, different values in the list. So yeah, there are a lot of different things you can do with lists as well. You can basically access each of the items in the list. You can see how long the list is. You can remove things from the list. You can add two lists together. There's a lot that you can do with lists. And it's also important to note that, so when you're accessing things in the list, how you get it is using what's called an index. So in Python, we index, so each kind of space that a list has a different value. So, so here, this value is kind of like the 0th place. This is the 1st place, the 2nd place, the 3rd place. So these are, so that's like the index of a list, and then you use that position, that index, in order to get the value that you want. So for example, so we have this list here, and then we index into it using this value. So this is like the position value. So this is showing that we want to get the 0th element of my list. So this 0th element, in Python, 0, it means like the first position. Basically Python starts counting at 0, so instead of 1, it's 0. But that means we want to get this, which is the 0th element. So the output for that would be 1. Yeah, I feel like this part can be confusing, but Python starts counting at 0. And so this would be the 0th element, this would be the 1st element, hello would be the 2nd element, and then 5.6 would be the 3rd element. And then, yeah, so let's get out of slideshow. Or actually, let me go over this first. So lists are mutable. So mutable means that you can change what's within a list. So you can do this by adding new items, getting rid of other items, changing different elements within the list. So in order to change, let's say we want to change this 1, which is in the 0th element spot, which is in the 0th index spot. So we would do this. So this is our variable spot. And then we set it to new item. And then we see that when we print it, the 1 has now been replaced with new item. So this is kind of nice. This is like a nice thing that you can do with lists. Like you can keep changing it around if you want. And yeah, there's a bunch of other things you can do with lists, but just for practice, let's go back here. So let's say we have a list, and we have A, B, C. So we have this list. So in order to get the length of the list, we can do len, which stands for length. So len of list. And then the length of the list, since there are 3 different elements in it, we would get 3. Then let's say we want to index into it. We want to get a specific thing out of the list. So for this, let's say we want to get the first element out of the list. Or by the first element, I mean the 0th index. So the very first thing in the list is the 0th element. The 0th. So we would do list, and then we have these brackets, and that's how we index into the list. Then we would do 0. And then we would get A. Let's say if we wanted to get the next thing, that would be B. And then we can also get the next thing, which would be C. And let's say by accident we type in 3 here. So there isn't anything else in the list currently. We only have A, B, C. So there isn't anything at that 3rd index spot. So this would error. It would say list out of range because there isn't anything else that's there. but we can add things to the list. So let's say we do want to add something there. So we want to put something in this list 3 spot, and let's add D to that. I think so you can't, so because it doesn't exist yet, we cannot do this because the list is already, like, it doesn't physically have that spot, as we can see. But we can change elements. So now instead of C, we have D here. So moving on to tuples. So this is another data type in Python. It's kind of looks similar to a list, except instead of brackets, it has parentheses. But the main difference between a list is you can't change things in a tuple. So with lists, we could like change different elements, but with tuples, you can't. You can just access whatever's in a tuple using the same bracket notation. So let's say we have my tuple, and we have these elements within it. Then in order to get this 0th index element, we can do my tuple, the bracket, and we would get 1. But we can't actually change anything in a tuple. And there's a lot of other things you can do with tuples as well. I would highly encourage just like exploring tuples and seeing how it works. Okay, yeah, so the next kind of structure in Python we'll be talking about is if-else statements. So let's say that you want to like have a choice in Python, or you want to do something only if like something else is true. So like kind of allowing Python to like make decisions, allowing your program to make decisions, go down different routes, things like that. So if-else statements are a great way to do that. So kind of how it works, we have this format over here. So we have if and then a certain condition. And then if this thing is true, then it'll go into this indented portion and run that. If this first part isn't true though, then it'll go to the else part. And then it will go into that indented portion and then do that. So it kind of gives Python a choice, like you can either do this thing in the if, or you could do the else thing if it doesn't work. So kind of some syntax and things to note down. The part that's with here needs to be indented. So there's 2 indentations here. So there's the part after the if and then the part after the else. If it's not indented and you have the if and the else and everything, then Python will give you an error saying that it doesn't recognize it, and that's because of the indentation. It's also important to have the colons here. So after you have the if and then your condition, having the colon and then the indentation, and then same thing for the else part. So let's play around a little bit with if else. So let's say that we want to make an if-else statement. So if we have a variable x that is greater than 0, then we want to print positive. If it's less than 0, then we want to print negative. And if it's equal to 0, then we want to print 0. So using kind of this format, just for a moment, just think about how you might do this. So I'll give you a few seconds just to think about it in your head, and then I'll go over it. So there are a few ways we can do this. So I'm going to type it out here and then put it into the console just so it's easier to see. So first, let's say we have a variable, and our variable is 10. So if x is greater than 0, then we want to print positive. Else, so this is one way you can do it. So this is kind of a nested structure. You could do it like this. If x is less than 0, print, oops, I cannot type today, negative. Else you want to print 0. So that's one way you can do it. If another way you could do this is if x is greater than 0, print positive. There's another part of the if-else statement. So if you wanted to, I guess, add another if statement that's kind of connected to this block, you can do elif, which is like else if. So it's like a second condition to it. So else if we have x is less than 0, then we would print negative. Else, meaning the only other option besides these, we would print 0. So let's try running this, and hopefully we will if my computer decides to work. My copy and paste is not working. It's not letting me type in here. Okay, let me refresh this page again. But since we have x is equal to 10, the goal is that we would have a print positive. And it wouldn't print negative or 0 because it doesn't end up going into those conditions. So okay, let me, so yeah. My computer's not working today. Okay, so we have, okay, let me just type it in here. Okay, so we have x equals 10. So if x is greater than 0, then we want to print positive. Oh my god. Yeah, don't forget your indentation. Yeah, I think a lot of coding is also just getting errors and learning from them. But yeah, okay. Is there an easier way to do this? Let me. Okay. Um, print to my REPL is not working today. Okay. Anyways, okay, but okay, we can talk this out. We don't need the compiler right now. Okay, so we have x equals 10. So we have this variable x. So if x is greater than 0, so in this case, we check our variable x, we see that it is true. So in that case, we go into this indented portion, and then we print positive. And once we do this part, we don't do the elif or the else. So it would just skip down to whatever code is down here. So that's kind of how it works. It's almost like you have like a fork in the road and you only choose to go down one of them. So that's how like if, elif, and else statements work. Okay, so we have two different types of loops. So loops are used if you want to repeat something for a certain amount of time. So we have for loops and we have while loops. So for loops, you repeat a block of code a certain amount of times, and we can use this range function in order to do that. So just going through this example, so we have a variable that is set to 0, and so we have x, which is equal to 0, and then we have this statement for x in range 6. So what range 6 is it's, you can kind of think of it as a list where it goes from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So range goes from, if you have a range and a number, it goes from 0 to 1 minus that number. So in this case, it goes to 5. So we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as part of this range 6. So for x in range 6, we would iterate and go through each element of this range. So because we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we would print it out. So the first time we go through it, x is going to be 0 because that's what the range part has. So 0 first, then we print 0. Then the next time we still aren't finished with the range. So we have 1, x is 1, then we print x, and we output 1 here. Then, so we're still not done with the range. We have 2 as our next part of the range. We print 2, and then so on until 5. And then once we're actually done with this whole range element, then we would stop doing this loop. So you can use it to repeat a certain, you can like put different things within the code, and then you would just repeat that code that many times as the range says. And then on the right side of the screen, we have a different type of loop called a while loop. So while loops, you use it to run a part of code as long as something is true. So it has the same condition as we saw with the if else, except there's a different keyword. We have while instead. So just walking through this example, so we have x, which is equal to 0, and then we have 0 is less than 6. I think this is a typo. So while x is less than 6, this should be x. So while x is less than 6, we would print x. So right now we have x as 0. So while x is less than 6, so this part is true because our x is 0, then we would go into this, print x, which is 0 right now, and then we would add 1. So this is code for like adding 1 to our x variable. So we would add 1. So now our x is 1. So then we go back to this. So then while x is less than 6, so it's still true because our x is 1. So we go into this, we print x, which is 1, and then we add 1 to x again. So now we have x as 2. So we go back up, while x is less than 6, which is true because we have 2, x as 2. We go into this, we print x, which is 2, and then we add 1. So now x is 3. So you keep doing that. And then finally, when at the end, we end up getting x as 6 once we add this. So we go up here, while 6 is less than 6, which isn't true because 6 is equal to 6. So then we wouldn't end up going into this, which is why 6 is not printed here. And then instead we would just exit out, like that's the end of the loop. Yeah. So some important things to know about loops. So with the for loop and the while loop, the key word is important. So the key word for the for loop is this for part. And then for while, it's the while. You make sure to like spell it correctly and everything because Python recognizes those keywords and then it knows that, okay, I need to do a while loop, I need to do a for loop. And similar to the if-else statements, you want to make sure you have the colons at the end of the for or while statement. And then any part that you want the code to loop through, you want to make sure that's indented. So in our case, it was printing x, and over here it was also adding 1. So this part is indented. And then anything that's outside of the loop that you don't want to be repeated, you want to make sure that it's not indented. So it would be in line with this while instead of being indented. Yeah, okay. Any questions about what I've talked about so far? I'll check the chat. Okay, and the loops doesn't have to be indented? Yeah, so you would want to indent within the loops. So whatever you want to be repeated or looped, you want to make sure that's indented. So it's like underneath the for or the while. Okay, let me move on. So another very useful thing that we can do in Python is creating a function. So a function is a block of code that you write, and you can use it anywhere within your code. So it makes things easier because you might not have to like repeat certain parts of your code. You can just kind of call the function, use the function, and save a lot of time and space. So I'll kind of explain this a little more, but functions have a certain structure to them. So we have the function name, first we have this keyword, which is def. So that stands for define. So if you're creating a function, you want to define it. So this is a Python keyword, and Python knows that if you're using def, that you are making a function. Then you have the name of your function. So whatever you want to call your function related to your code. So you would put that there. And then you have parentheses. And within these parentheses goes something called parameters. So those are special values that you can input into your function. So you can kind of think of a function as like an input and output train. So like you input some values based on what your function is doing. The function does something with those inputs, and then it outputs something. So the parameters are your input. Then the code, it does things with those parameters, with those inputs. And then you have this keyword called return. And then you put some code here, return based on what your function's doing. And then that lets the function output whatever value. So we have like our input as parameters, our return statement, which is the output, and then the name of our function, and then this def keyword. That's the structure of a function. So let's do an example function. I think that will hopefully clear up like the keywords and the point of the input and the output. So for example, let's say we have the function add 3. So what we want this function to do is take in an input, and then it adds 3 to the value that we input, and then it returns that value. So that's what the output would be, the added 3 to the value. So we have our def keyword, we have the name of our function, which is add 3. Then as the parameter, we have x. So x is going to be the input number that we put in. And then within the function, we have it indented, so Python knows that this part of the code is part of the function. So we have an indented and then return. And then what we're returning is x plus 3. So our input value, we want to add 3 to that. And then we want to output that. So we define this function, and then later on in our code, wherever, we can call this function. So calling, instead of doing everything that's within this function, we can instead just say add 3, parentheses, and then put a value in for x. So we have add 3, 10, and then the result of this would be 13. And then you can do this for like other numbers, let's say like 1,000 or something. If we have to add 3, 1,000, then the output would be 1,003. So that's an example function. So the function name is add3, parameter is 10, which is our input, and the return statement is x plus 3. So that's kind of how functions work. They're really useful so here we only had like one line of code in our within our function, which was the return x plus 3. But as like you keep getting more advanced and into like more complicated code, like you might have like 50 lines, or like, I don't know, like some like huge amount of lines within your function. And that's when it becomes really useful, because instead of writing those 50 lines like in different places throughout your code, you can just call one line, and that's when it becomes super, super useful. Okay. So yeah, so there are coding etiquettes as part of just writing code in Python and writing code in general. And the main reasons for this is just to make your code a lot more readable, more organized. That way you can understand your code, but also other people, if they're reading it, can also understand your code. So there's a few coding etiquettes, and it just helps to like practice them as you're like just like writing lines of code. That way it just kind of becomes second nature. So part of this, so one of them is using comments. So you can use the hashtag and then literally write whatever you want. You can be like, oh, this function like adds 3, as a comment and then have the function down below. That way it's super clear what your function is doing or what your code is doing. Another coding etiquette, naming your functions and variables appropriately. So like we had our function add3, we wouldn't want to call it add4, but then the function actually adds 3. Like that's super misleading. Like you want to name it properly. Your variables, if like just making sure that the variable name properly describes like what you're using the variable for. So it's kind of intuitive, but yeah, just don't make it more complicated for yourselves and for other people to read. And then typically we try not to use a lowercase l or uppercase I because they both look the same. They're basically just like a straight line. Or a 0 or a capital O because those are also just round. And it's very hard to tell like what variable you're using, and it could lead to potential errors in your code because you don't know if it's like a lowercase l or a capital I or something. So yeah, just a few coding etiquettes. So that's the end of the slides. Let me see if my REPL will work. And then we can, I guess worst case, I can just talk through it. Okay, so let's do, or I guess first, any questions about anything I've talked about?
Feel free to unmute yourself if you have a question as well. You don't just have to pop them in the chat.
Yeah,
I
kind of, or sorry, is someone saying something?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
So can you call a function outside, like what if you have several functions in a code? Can you call a specific function in a separate function? I don't know if that made sense.
Yeah. So are you talking like if we have like this function and then we have another function, or let's call it 3. Are you saying like if we wanted to call like a function within this one?
Yeah, can you call the multiply by 2 function in this one or no?
Yeah, yeah, you can. So it gets a little, so because like we're defining it here and it's not defined like within something else, then you will be able to use it. Let's say if you defined the function within another function, then that's when it gets a little more complicated. But yeah, since both of these are like kind of in like this global environment, kind of just like we're open to use like any of the functions that we define here, so you will be able to.
Okay, thanks. And then what's the main difference between the print and then the return?
Yeah, so return is used just for functions. So you can't return something like outside of a function. Like return is a keyword specifically used for a function. Whereas print, like you can print outside a function, inside a function, but like return like signals to Python that, okay, this is the value that I want to output as part of this function.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other questions?
Also, to add on to the first question you had, that's also something that we call recursion, which is something you should definitely look into if that's something you're interested in exploring. Also, there might be someone in the waiting room. I saw something in the chat if you want to check.
Oh yeah, let me do that.
In the meantime, are there any other questions?
Okay, cool. Yeah. I know I kind of like, this is like a lot of different concepts that I covered in like 45 minutes. It definitely takes a lot of time to kind of like ingrain these concepts and like learn more about them. So I will send this REPL out after this Zoom call. That way you can kind of play around with it, and you can even it's like completely free. It's like in your browser, so like as long as you have Wi-Fi, you like you're connected to the internet, you can use it, and you can. I think the best way to like learn about all of these things is just to like play around with it. So like creating like your own for loop and like seeing what happens, or like creating a string and seeing all of the things that you can do with it using the different string methods. Yeah, and yeah, there's like, yeah, and that's like the best way, just like breaking things and like correcting it, and like that's the best way to learn about it. But and yeah, if you have any questions, just yeah, feel free to unmute, or in the Discord as well. I can answer questions there.
Yeah, so after she sends this out as well, you should be able to remix the project, which will allow you to edit it. And one thing I just wanted to point out is that REPL has this thing where they only run the main.py function. So I know we have like a new.py function and it won't run it just because that's something that REPL does. So that's probably something that might save a bit of hassle when you guys are trying to, tinker with REPL. This code also works in like your own local environment if you do like install Python and run it on your device. So you can also like copy and paste it and stick it in there as well. Also, yes, we will be going over more complex topics in different libraries that are used in data science throughout the next few days of the program. And so while you guys are coming up with any other questions you have, I'm going to stick the attendance form in the chat. This is what we're going to be using to track the active participation. Okay, so I just sent that in there. The form will close at 3:30, so make sure to fill it out by then. If you have any other questions, we can answer those now. We also have a mentor help channel in the Discord server, which you can also put any questions into as you come up with them. And that's all I had, unless Shalini wanted to go over anything else.
Does anyone want me to like kind of talk through some of like these loops and functions and stuff? Would that be helpful? If not, then I can stop sharing, but if anyone wants me to, I can.
I think you can go over that right now if we don't have any other questions.
Okay, sounds good. So let's see. Okay, so let's say that we have this while loop over here. So we have a variable x, which we've set that value to 0. And then we can see that we have a while loop because we have this while keyword. So we have the while keyword, and then we have this condition. So if x is less than 5. So just walking through this, so what Python would do, so we have our x equals to 0. So while x is less than 5, so we check what x is. So x is 0 currently, which is less than 5. So we enter the loop. So we enter this indented portion. Then we print I love Python. And then we add 1 to x. and set x to this new value. So what this line of code is doing, it's basically adding 1 to the variable x. So once we add 1, our new x value becomes 1. And then since we're still within the loop, we go back up to the top. We don't go to the next line yet because that's outside of the loop. We go back here and we see if the condition is met. So since we have 1 is less than 5, it's true. So we go within the loop. We do everything again. We add 1. So now we have x is 2. We go back up here. Whoop. We go back up here. We have 2 is less than 5, which is still true. So we go into the loop, print, we add 1. So now we have x is equal to 3. Our variable has the value of 3. So going back up here, it's still true. We do everything again. Now our variable after this is x is 4. We go back up here. 4 is less than 5, which is true. So we enter the loop again, print, add 1. Now x is 5. We go back up here to check what our condition is. 5 is less than 5 is not true. So now we don't enter the loop. We essentially exit out of the loop. And now we go to the first line after the loop, which in this case is this. So then we would print, we are done with this loop. So this kind of shows so I guess the point of this was you don't print this last line until you are absolutely done with everything that's happening in the while loop, which is an important note. Yeah, so that's while loops. Going back to functions, so this is an example function. So we have our define keyword. We have the name of our function, which is multiply by 2. And then we have our parameters. So in this case, it's called input. So we can see that this input parameter is used within the function. And what we do here is whatever the input is, we multiply by 2. And we set this to an output variable, and then we end up returning that output. So it's the same concept, input, we do stuff with that input, and then we output it, and we return it. So then we can use this function in multiple different ways. We can do multiply by 2 with 2 inside, so this would result in 4. Multiply by 2, 1,000, which would get us 2,000, and then so on. So basically we can call this same function and use different inputs and get various results. So yeah, any questions about that? Okay, cool. Yeah, I think that's it for the presentation part of it.
Yep, so that's all we have then. We finished 3 minutes early, so we're good on time. Shalini, do you want to give me back host permissions? Because I'm not sure if I'll need that for saving the recording.
Oh yeah, let me do that.
And apart from that, you can feel free to leave now. We're excited to see you in the upcoming days this week, and I hope you all have a good rest of the week.